So a little over a week ago, I made a video titled Nintendo Switch, Why the Hardware Won't Be a Problem. Now, I just released that as just another video on my channel. I expected it just to get the same amount of traffic as everything else, but oh boy was I wrong. For those of you who are just starting at this channel, 1, welcome, I'm super happy to see you here, and 2, 9 days ago when that video was uploaded, I had 430 subscribers. I now have 2,000 more than that, and I'm gaining 1 to 200 per day. I appreciate that more than you could possibly imagine, so thank you so much. The video right now is sitting at around 140,000 views, but of course I'm not actually getting anything from that because Nintendo's claimed it and is stealing all the money, but that doesn't really matter too much because me making a video on their product gained me this much exposure and it's rising at a pretty rapid rate. So yeah, welcome to the channel, I'm super happy to see you here, and let's get into today's topic. I figured I'd make a part 2 to that video because there's a lot of unanswered questions left from that video that people are commenting on, and oh boy are there a lot of comments, much more than what I'm used to getting. So I'm going to go through a few different categories today, just like I went last time, and kind of address said topics. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is a common misconception I was actually seeing in the comments there. It seems a lot of people think that I was trying to say in my previous video that the Nintendo Switch was going to be a super powerful system and that it's going to be just as powerful as Xbox One and PS4 and we'll have nothing to worry about. That's actually not what I was saying. What I was saying in that video was that the Nintendo Switch was not going to be so anemic and so different in its architecture that developers are going to have a hard time working on it, and I provided some evidence showing how modern architecture and also good support from the actual creators of the hardware can help with game development. To be honest, I don't even see the Nintendo Switch hitting Xbox One power levels, even if my dock overclock video says that it could possibly get more powerful by sitting inside the dock. Sorry to disappoint, but at the end of the day, this thing's a high-end tablet. It's not a full-fledged console or PC-like device. It's more like a tablet than it is any of those things, so it's not going to be in the same power league, but it's just not going to be that anemic. At least not as bad as like the Wii was compared to the 360 and the PS3. Another comment I saw in the video quite a few times was that I didn't address the amount of RAM that is rumored to be inside the system. If we're going to assume that 4 gigs is the actual amount that's in the system, which is pretty likely, that's actually more than enough. Adding more VRAM to a system does not make a system perform better. It's diminishing returns at a certain point. You don't want to have too little VRAM, otherwise you'll be restricting the hell out of the system. Just look at the PS4 Pro. But you also don't want to have too much because then you're just spending too much on chips that you're not even going to use. What you want is a nice balance of VRAM and RAM to the amount of performance that is expected from the system. If this thing's going to be around the power level that we expected from the rumors, then having a pool of 4 gigs of RAM is actually not going to be too little for the developers to work with. For one, the actual system RAM side of the thing, even the most high-demand games I've played on my PC, I've checked on Task Manager, they rarely ever exceed a gig. They're usually only a few hundred megabytes on the regular RAM, because they don't need to use that much, because most RAM from games gets used in the graphics card in the video RAM. And about the video RAM, if this thing's going to be playing games in around 720p to 1080p with moderate settings, this thing probably won't need more than like 1 to 2 gigs of RAM to use for the actual video memory. And about the Switch's operating system itself, I mean, yes, they could make a really bloated operating system that uses more than a gig of RAM, but that's probably not going to be the case. One, the software development for this thing, as I've went over in my previous video, is going to be far superior than what Nintendo's capable of doing. The Wii U system RAM used a whole gig of RAM, which meant that developers only had access to 1 gig of RAM, which was significantly more than what they had access to in the 360 and PS3, but it still wasn't enough for modern games. I don't think they're going to repeat that mistake. And 2, take a look at the iPhone or the 360 and PS3 for an example. They're able to have pretty comprehensive operating systems full of modern features despite the 360 and PS3 being, more than 10 years old at this point. Yet, they don't use that much RAM to run their operating system. When you're in the middle of a game, it uses maybe a few dozen megabytes and that's it. And the rest is reserved for games. And it has to be that way because a lot of the games on 360 and PS3 are, especially the later ones like Grand Theft Auto 5, are squeezing out as much RAM as they possibly could from that system. So if we highball the amount of system RAM and regular game RAM that this thing is going to be requiring, that's about like 1.5 gigabytes, and that leaves 2.5 gigabytes of VRAM to be used for, the game's graphics. And that's not set. it's going to be a pool of RAM, which means the developers can use it however they see fit. Maybe they'll have a game that just requires like 50 to 100 megabytes of RAM, as unlikely as that is, leaving a crap load of room for video RAM. But even if that happened, they would not even come close to using all of that video RAM, because the system would not be powerful enough to require that much VRAM. This is the reason why you don't see RX 480s or GTX 1060s sold with 16 gigabytes of VRAM, because they simply wouldn't be used. Hell, even 8 gigs of VRAM for the 1060 and RX 480 is overshooting it a little bit. Those things are about powerful enough that using around 4 to 5 gigs of VRAM total is pretty much hitting it at its peak performance. There's not really anything that can max out that VRAM on those cards. I'm not saying the Switch is going to be as powerful as either of those cards, that's definitely not going to be the case, but it's just an example of how adding more VRAM doesn't really add performance unless you're not adding enough VRAM and then you add more to a card that doesn't have enough. I saw a lot of comments saying that the Switch could possibly have an underclocked GTX 1050 inside of it. Now, if the Switch was a normal box like the PS4 Pro and Xbox Scorpio are going to be, yes, I could see the thing using a GTX 1050 variant inside of it if Nintendo ended up going with NVIDIA for a regular box console, but this thing's going to be a tablet. It's not going to use any type of variation of the 1050. It will be using, most likely, Pascal architecture, which is what the GTX 1050 uses, but there's no way in hell this thing's using a full-fledged 1050 inside of it. Not only would that cost too much, even with Nintendo's bulk discount they get for buying a crap load of the devices, but that would run way too hot and take way too much power for something in a tablet form factor. Who knows, we could see maybe some sort of supplemental computing device in the future that allows for something like this, but for now, the Switch is definitely not going to have a 1050 inside of it. Sorry to disappoint anybody. Another comment I saw a few times was people saying that I was wrong about the Wii U's architecture because the thing doesn't get super hot, therefore my comparison with the PowerPC and Intel Mac Switch wasn't actually valid for this argument. The point I was trying to make by mentioning the Apple switch from IBM PowerPC to Intel x86 wasn't that the Wii U got super hot and that that's what Nintendo was trying to fix. The point I was trying to make is that by switching to a modern architecture, you can get a lot more performance per watt out of the system and a lot more modern features and compatibility with software. The Wii U doesn't actually use that much power for its games. I think it maxes out around like 30 watts or so, and it rarely ever hits that. Now imagine Nintendo switching from that old-ass architecture to something absolutely brand new like what's inside the new Tegra chip, and imagine what kind of performance they could get out of a system with that. I know they want to use like 5 to 10 watts for a mobile system and maybe bump that up to like 20 inside the dock, 20 or 30, but with a modern architecture that at the very least would be about 8 years newer, they can get so much more performance out of the system even in a low-power state. You saw the comparison in that video. The Power Mac G5 was pulling about 350 watts from the wall and it was doing something as simple as watching an HD video, while the Mac Mini Intel Duo one was pulling about 20 watts to do the same thing. So imagine what kind of performance gains and graphic gains Nintendo could get by switching to a brand new architecture as opposed to just using the old architecture they've been using since the late 90s when the GameCube was being developed. Another comment I've been seeing quite commonly, and this isn't necessarily just related to my video, even though I saw it a few times on there, I've been seeing this on a lot of Switch videos, is that people have been mockingly saying, oh boy, the Nintendo Switch is getting a 5-year-old game in Skyrim, how impressive. Nintendo Switch is dead and weak, it's getting a last-gen game, blah blah blah. First off, you're forgetting the fact that the PS4 and Xbox One just got that game too. Does that make them anemic and super weak? Well, they kind of are, but still, in terms of consoles, does that make them super weak? No, it doesn't. And by the way, the version that the Switch is getting is the version that is on the PS4 and Xbox One. It's the Special Edition, which is a version of the game designed for hardware with that power level in mind. If the Switch was surely as weak as you were saying it is, it would be getting the last-gen version of Skyrim, the original version, and not the Special Edition. And for those of you who are saying, oh, you can't tell that it's the Special Edition, look at the footage we've seen so far of it. That's the Special Edition. And based on what we've been hearing in interviews, especially from Skyrim's director, it's going to be the Special Edition. So we're getting a version of the game on the Switch that was designed for PS4 and Xbox One-esque power levels in mind on the Switch. Combine that with the fact that Bethesda, who has not worked with Nintendo since the NES and Super Nintendo, is porting a game over to the Switch. They may not be making an original game just yet, but they're actually supporting the Switch, which is more than what they've ever done for Nintendo since those days. Bethesda has not wanted to do anything, and specifically for the reason that their hardware was either too different or it was anemic in the case of the Wii and the Wii U. So that's the reason why people are happy to see Skyrim Special Edition being shown off for the Switch. Not because it's some sort of amazing new game and it's going to be a game breaker, but because the version of the game being used gives us an idea of the power level of the Switch, and the fact that Bethesda, who has been one of the most reluctant developers to ever put any games on a Nintendo system, is putting a game on a Nintendo system for the first time in decades. That's a good sign about the third-party support to come for this system. So that about wraps it up for now. I'm going to keep making videos like this the more comments I see that require answering, and I'd be more than happy to keep doing that. But anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, and just like I said on my last video, please definitely follow me on Twitter if you haven't yet, because it's definitely the best way to kind of interact with me and see what I'm up to when I'm not posting videos. And also, of course, I'm going to have to do the obvious, give this video a like if you enjoyed it, maybe give it a dislike if you thought it sucked, and subscribe if you really, really enjoy my videos. You guys have a great rest of your day.